Matt. Good morning, friends. What a pleasure it is to start the week in this way, learning together with one of the best. While many of you here today are from the DC metro area, the home of our institute, many are also joining us from across North America and beyond. So, to all of you, a good afternoon, a good evening, a good very early morning. We're thrilled that so many of you could join us online today to welcome Dr. Avivah Zornberg to speak with us on Let Me See That Good Land, the Story of a Human Life. I am Avi West, a board member at the Haberman Institute for Jewish Studies, and I'm honored to introduce this program. For those of you who are new to the Haberman Institute or one of its events, may not be sure who's behind this particular Zoom learning, the mission of our organization is to provide high quality, in-depth encounters with Jewish thought, history, and culture. And I'm sure that's exactly what you will take away from today's session. Before we begin, on behalf of the Haberman Institute, I would like to thank our partners, Agudas Achim Congregation, Congregation Ner Shalom, and the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington for helping bring this program to the community. Our fall semester continues into next month with a lecture beginning on December 1st with Dr. Bernie Steinberg, The Soul of Maimonides, Knowledge, Love, and Ethics. Please visit our website at habermaninstitute.org to learn more about this unique opportunity to learn together, as well as much more of what we offer. And now on to today's program. Dr. Avivah Zornberg in Israel, welcome.
Thank you.
Born in London, Avivah grew up in Glasgow, where her father was a rabbi and the head of the rabbinical court. She studied Torah with him from childhood. Her PhD in English literature is from Cambridge University, England, and she taught English literature at the Hebrew University before turning to teach Torah. She now teaches throughout the Jewish world at synagogues, universities, and psychoanalytic institutes. Dr. Zornberg is the author of 5 critically acclaimed books. Her most recent book, Moses, A Human Life, was published as part of their Jewish Lives series by Yale University Press. She's currently working on a study of the book of Leviticus. Dr. Zornberg lives in Jerusalem, where she has been lecturing on Torah since 1980. Currently, she lectures at several Jerusalem institutes, including Matan and Beit Avichai. She reads biblical narratives through the prism of Midrash, literature, philosophy, and particularly psychoanalysis. If you will allow me just 1 minute of a personal reflection and hakarat hatov, a moment of appreciation as we're getting ready for Thanksgiving. I was privileged to be in the audience, and I believe one of the introducers of Dr. Zornberg about 20 years ago or more, when she was on her first book tour of Genesis, right, that first book. And she inscribed the book to me that day with the following, Ma'ahavti Toratecha, how I love your Torah, and the commentary from Midrash Tehillim, Kol mi she'ohev et haTorah eino ohev el hachayim, that anyone who loves Torah truly loves it through the study, through the in-depth study, revealing the literature of Torah and the psychoanalysis of Torah, all of the depths of meaning, actually loves life. And I think that many years later, here it is during a year of pandemic, and that to me still is a most relevant message, and I thank you for that. I know we are all eager to learn from Dr. Zornberg. The final 10 minutes of our program will be devoted to your questions. If you would like to ask a question, please type into the chat box directly to the Q&A moderator option, which is there. Please remember to keep your microphones muted and feel free to join us by sharing your video. We are thrilled to have you with us, Dr. Zornberg, and with that, the screen is yours.
that I know in the Torah, and that is the subject of how Moshe, on the verge of death, pleads with God to allow him his heart's desire. And we hear his plea, and God interrupts his plea. He doesn't hear him out, and he says to him, Rav lecha, that's quite enough. And I'm going to start our meeting by looking at that scene in a little more detail. But the bottom line is that God, who has always been amenable to conversation with Moshe, when it comes to something that Moshe desperately wants for himself, God simply closes him down. And I think there are few people who can read this story without having some emotional reaction. I want to begin by zooming out, as it were, and bringing up this quote from Kafka that gave me the title for this talk and for my book, Moses, A Human Life. You might well wonder what other kind of life would Moses have? After all, don't we all have human lives? And so I want to read you the passage from Kafka in one of his diary entries, in which Kafka says something very penetrating about Moses' life, but even more about what he thinks a human life is. I wonder if I could get rid of this notice here. I know, I'll just go into this. Okay, that's better. This is a passage. Moses is on the track of Canaan all his life. It is incredible that he should see the land only when on the verge of death. The dying vision of it can only be intended to illustrate, and here we get to the point, how incomplete a moment is human life. Incomplete because a life like this, a human life, could last forever and still be nothing but a moment. Even if it lasted forever, it would still be nothing but a moment. Moses fails to enter Canaan, not because his life is too short, but because it is a human life. That is, for Kafka, there is something about the very nature of human life that makes it a mere moment. That means, in some sense, that however long one lives, in the end, one dies in the middle. One dies, perhaps, just before the people cross over into the land of desire. And so Moses here, in his frustration of desire, right? That's his situation in this scene that really pervades the whole of the book of Deuteronomy. That's the central scene, personally speaking. In this scene, we have a sense, according to Kafka, of the sheer humanity of Moses, that Moses didn't have a life different from all our lives. Now, this is a rather melancholy statement about human life, to which there are parallels in the work of the sages. The Talmudic sages have similar things to say. No man dies, no human being dies with half his desire in his hand. That is, no one lives to see the fulfillment of all desire. And perhaps there's something being said here about the nature of human desire. That there's something about the way we desire that almost means that we will not find the fulfillment of the desire. Now that's a strong claim I'm making there. And it's again, very melancholy. But I think as we get into it, I think we'll begin to understand a little more when you look at the context and when we look at the implications of this situation. I think we'll realize that it's not all bad news. Let's move into the material now. Let's have a look now. I'll just read you, it's not on your source page, but I'll just read you the crucial scene. This is in chapter 3 of Sefer Devarim, the book of words. Right? That's the Hebrew title for Deuteronomy. Eile hadvarim asher diber Moshe. This book begins, these are the words that Moses spoke to the children of Israel on the plains of Moab, just in Transjordan, just before the people cross over. So Moses speaks many words in this book. This book is made up of a large section of this book, something like a third of this book, is made up of Moses' final speeches to the people. And this is the man, you remember, who couldn't speak. Right? That's how we were first introduced to him. Lo ish devarim anochi. I am not a man of words. Couldn't be clearer. He says that to God at the burning bush. When God appears to him for the first time, this is the first vision, it's the first revelation that Moses has there in the back of beyond in the wilderness, Char HaMidbar. And God wants to commission him to bring the people out of Egypt. And Moses answers, I'm not a man of words. And he backs this up by saying, very graphically, he says, Kvad peh ukvad lashon. I'm heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. Now there, Moses is describing, it seems to me, simply what it's like to be Moses, what it's like to be in Moses' mouth. Your mouth feels heavy and your tongue feels heavy. And it's laborious for you to get words out. It's hard for you to get words out. It's hard for, we tend to think rather, perhaps a little too quickly, that he had a stammer. That's the way we describe it to the children, that he had a stammer. Well, that is a possible symptom. A stammer is a possible symptom of the inner world of someone who is kvad peh. It doesn't have to register that way. It means he finds it difficult to do that thing of coming out of himself and connecting through words with others. The most graphic expression he uses back then at the burning bush is Ani aral sfatayim. I am of uncircumcised lips. Well, that's quite graphic. That is as if he has a foreskin hanging on his lips that needs clipping in some way, if he is to be able to find a space through which to talk. So we start off with a real sense of Moses' real sense of how he can't speak. There's no point in appointing him to this role of bringing the people out of Egypt and speaking to Pharaoh in their name and so on, because he can't speak. And then we have at the end of the story a whole book called Ele Hadvarim. These are the words that Moses spoke. Many, many words by the end of his life. What do you know? Somehow, without noticing it, Moses has recovered. Something has happened. He spoke many words. Ele Hadvarim. In fact, the Midrash, in quite a humorous note, I think, says, it's actually at the beginning of the last source on your page. You don't really need to look it up, but if you will, Midrash Tanchuma in number 8, just the little bit at the beginning, these are the words that Moses spoke. Israel said, just yesterday, at the beginning of your life, you said, I'm not a man of words. And now you have so much to say. That, in a way, the Midrash is expressing as a little humorously, how come you're such a big speaker all of a sudden, when at the beginning you couldn't speak at all?
We were talking about difficulties in communication. So back to the scene with Moses and God, where Moses pleads with God. Okay. He says to God, please let me cross over and let me see the land, the good land, which is the Ever Hayarden, on the other side of the Jordan. E'evra be'ever Hayarden. His plea is to cross over from one side to the other side of the Jordan. It's very specific. Let me see that good land, which is on the other side. Now, the word to cross over, la'avor, is going to be very important for us, because that's the word that's used throughout this book to describe what previously was described as aliyah. In the book of Numbers, if you wanted to talk about going into the land, then the word was la'alot, to go up into the land. In the book of Deuteronomy, the word is to cross over the river, obviously, the River Jordan. Beyond that, it has a kind of metaphoric valence as well, metaphoric value. The idea that in order, what Moses really wants is to cross over from here to there. That is a description, I want to say, of the erotic. That is the erotic movement of when one wants to move from where one is to somewhere else, somewhere that is, in a sense, elsewhere. That is what Moses wants in a very radical way in his life. And then we read, Vayitaber Hashem bi lemanchem, and God was furious with me. Because of you, he tells the people. What does he mean by that? You are responsible in some way for God's anger with me. And you notice that the word for anger is the unusual word, which also has ayin bet resh as its root, la'avor, to cross over. As if to say, God was transported with anger. Something, he was taken beyond himself with anger. But it's the same root. Because of you. V'lo shama elai, and he wouldn't listen to me. I think that's almost the worst part of this. He wouldn't listen to me. And he said to me, Ravlach, stop right there, that's quite enough. Al tosif daber elai od badavar hazeh. Don't talk to me anymore about this thing. Daber, davar, don't talk to me. Now, this is against a history when God has always been open to Moses talking to him. If Moses had difficulties talking and being understood, it was with the people, but not with God. That's the irony now. God was always open to Moses' interventions, his intercessions for the people when they were in trouble, the golden calf. It was always Moses who interceded and God who listened and to some extent accepted Moses' prayers. So Moses always had a listening ear with God. I often have the impression that Moses is really more comfortable at the top of the mountain talking to God than he is at the bottom of the mountain trying to talk to the people, right? He's got a rebellious people, and the feeling he has throughout his life in connection with the people is that I can't make them listen to me. He says, "V'lo yishma'u b'koli," they will not listen to me, he says to God at the burning bush right away. They're not going to believe me, and they're not going to listen to my voice. That means they're not going to pay attention. And that's what Moses means when he says, I am not a man of words. It isn't just the stammer. The stammer is a symptom. It's the feeling he has that he can't come over to the people. He can't reach out to the people and make them listen to him. With God, there never was a problem. And now at the end of his life, God suddenly cuts him short, refuses to listen. It's like the ultimate slight, you know, if you're trying to talk to someone and they're just not listening to you. And he says, don't go on talking to me anymore about this matter. Go up to the top of this mountain here, lift up your eyes, west, north, south, and east, ure'eh be'enecha, and you can see with your eyes, ki lo ta'avor et hayarden. You will not cross over this Jordan. And again, there is this emphasis on crossing over. Wouldn't it have been more to the point to say you will not get to see the Holy Land? Instead, God says it in a very literary and subtle way. He says, actually, you're going to see the land from the top of a mountain on the other side. If you wanted to see, you'll see it, but you will not cross over. He wanted both. He said, let me cross over and let me see. And God says, you can see, but you will not cross over. And then as if to emphasize the point, now charge Joshua with the leadership of the people, and because he will cross over in front of the people. And here we don't even have any reference to the river. It's just the word that means Ya'avor, he will cross over. It just means he will be the one to lead the people across over there to that place that you want. And your seeing will not be the seeing that you desired. When you said see, you meant from close up. You meant to be there. But you can see from a distance. That's what you... So God is saying to him, technically speaking, you can have half of what you want. Midrash actually puts it like that, which is really dire irony. You know, Moses doesn't get anything of what he wants. What he wanted was quite clear. And here is Moses now with God not listening to him. Lo shama Eli. I think the poignancy of this scene is almost beyond bearing. It's really, it's impossible to overstate it. Now, this no from God, in the end, it is a no. Yes, God finally says, Lo ta'avur, you will not cross over. But really the damage has been done before God actually says no. So the point is not just, I'm not giving you what you want, but I'm not even listening to you talking to me anymore about this matter. Now, how do we understand this kind of cruelty of God? Right? So it's a word that's used sometimes in the Midrash. The din of God, the harsh judgment of God, which occasionally is called midat ha'achzariyut, the attribute of cruelty that God has. I want to suggest that there is a clue to be heard if we listen carefully, and this is all about listening carefully. When God says, stop right there, don't talk to me anymore about this thing, I would like to hear that word, don't talk to me about this thing, as a kind of hint to Moshe, stop talking to me. I know I'm always your best recourse. You always know you have a good relationship with me. Right? You can always depend on that. I am in a way cutting you off now because I want you to turn that energy now to talk to someone else, not to turn to me. Right? It's a strange, in a religious text, that's a strange turn. It's the turn towards the human. It's lech red, get on down the mountain. Do you remember that God says to Moses, get on down the mountain, lech red, twice during the time at Sinai? Once when he's actually at the top of the mountain enjoying the bliss of revelation, right, getting all ready for hearing the real thing. And God says to him, lech red, go down and join your people during the actual revelation. You will hear me from the bottom of the mountain with the people and not from the top of the mountain. And then again in the golden calf, God says, lech red. You can't stay up here with me receiving, again, the bliss of spiritual revelation. What do I need you for? There also, the language in the Midrash is very harsh. Ata lamali. It's a commentary on lech red. Get on down there. What do I need you for? What do I need? What do I need you? Everything that we are doing together is bishvil Yisrael, is for the sake of Israel. That expression, bishvil Yisrael. All the ecstasy of this personal communication that you have with me is in order that the people should receive the benefit of it. You are just a messenger, lech red. So go on down there and into the theater of your real operations. That's really where you have to be. And of course, this goes against the grain from Moshe. But we have to notice that this story of Moses' harsh refusal by God, we only hear about it because Moses tells the people about it. It comes to us in the form of a narrative that Moses tells the people. If we didn't have that narrative, then we would not know from any other source. There's no impersonal narrator who tells us that this scene happened between Moses and God. So there's no other testimony to this scene. The only testimony is Moses himself telling a story to the people, which immediately raises the question. I think we're beginning to get hold of a thread here. It immediately raises the question, why does Moses tell the people, go to the trouble of telling the people, such a frustrating, and I would even say humiliating story? Right? It's a story which shows Moses really treated harshly and left speechless. That God actually tells him, I don't want to hear another word from him. Why does he trouble to tell that to the people? And if he hadn't told, and I could see every human reason for not wanting to tell it, then we would never have heard about it. Right? They wouldn't know about it, and we wouldn't know about it. The whole story would simply disappear. Well, it seems as if, and I'm basing myself on midrashic sources here, it seems as if the news of his rejection, of the rejection of his prayer, which we would have thought would be purely devastating, has a kind of paradoxical effect on Moshe. We read about Moshe in another scene, which Rashi guesses to be the place where actually this happened, the moment in his history when this happened, after Moshe receives, that is, God tells him to climb the mountain, Har HaAvarim, climb the mountain of transitions, of crossings over. Climb that mountain and look out over the land. You will look north, south, east, and west. You will see it, but you will not cross over. So that is understood to be perhaps the parallel moment when this scene happens. And what we read happens after that is, Vayidaber Moshe el Hashem. And Moshe spoke to God. And he said to him, I need to know now who is going to replace me. I want you to provide a good leader now for the people. And the expression that's used there is Vayidaber Moshe. Moshe spoke to God in a form, dibur, which we never see anywhere else in the Torah. Moshe never is midaber to God. What he does with God, of course, all the time, is Vayomer. Yes? Vayomer Moshe el Hashem. Now, those two words, in English we say speaking and saying, which doesn't really make much difference. But in Hebrew, there's all the difference in the world. As the Midrash puts it very often, Amira is Lashon Raka, is soft language. Dibur is harsh language. It's the language of will, of power. Yeah, it's with that kind of language that Moshe speaks for the first and last time in his life. He turns to God and he says to him, all right, I understand what you're saying to me. And suddenly in that moment of devastation, new force comes into him, as if now he has the power to speak tough to God. And he says, right, what kind of psychological movement is this that happens in Moshe just when he's received the worst news? Yes? Right? Rather than being devastated, it's as if there's some kind of compensatory mechanism. Something compensates in him, and he finds unexpected strength. And it's perhaps in this mood that he decides then to tell the story to the people. But that still remains a kind of mystery. Why does he do that? What does he hope to gain? In fact, one of the midrashic comments on this is that even if a sword is on your neck, you should never despair of compassion. In other words, keep praying till the very end, because you never know. Maybe your fate will turn. Maybe God will have mercy. But I don't see that that's the moral of this story, because God doesn't have mercy. God, in fact, resigns his position altogether in Moses' life, as it were. He says, oh, that's decided already. You have other business now in view. Your business now is with the people. And I want to remain with this pathos of Moshe. Moshe desperately wants to cross over. And I use the word erotic about that. There is eros in that. And I want to, as we go along, I want to develop this idea. What exactly do I mean by that? But for the moment, just for the purpose of irony, notice at the end of the book of Numbers, you remember, 2.5 tribes come and they say, we don't want to cross over there. We want to stay on this side of Jordan because there is great agricultural land here, great grazing. There's great grazing land for our cattle, and we have cattle. We have a lot of cattle. That's our livelihood. That's our lives. We always get the impression. They list the cattle ahead of their little children, right? Rashi notices that already. These are people who are very invested in landed property. In other words, who need good ground for that's our hold on the world. And here there is tremendous grazing ground. The way they put it is Al Ta'avirenu et HaYarden. Please don't make us cross over Please don't make us cross over this Jordan. How must that have sounded to Moses? If you remember the story, Moses gets very angry. And on the surface level, the understanding is that he gets angry a bit too quickly because they reassure him and they say, oh no, we will cross over to fight the battles. We will join in the national effort, in the national military project. But we want our land to be on this side. We want to cross back over here afterwards to live. So, and that Moses accepts. I'm suggesting the reason Moses gets angry, perhaps, is also to hear these people who can cross over not crossing over. They say, please, it's the last thing in the world we want. Don't make us do this thing, which is called la'avor, to cross over to the other side. As if they have something in them that simply is allergic to what I'm calling the erotic in this particular form of entering the Holy Land. But I want to take it also in a larger sense, the act of crossing over to something else. And with this, I want to move with you to look at extraordinary passages, starting from a Hasidic passage. You have to get your source page ready. Starting from a Hasidic passage from the late 19th century, number 4, by the Mea Shiloach. The Mea Shiloach is known as the Ishbitzer, Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Leiner, who has a most provocative, in general, a most provocative and original reading of the text of the Torah. Over and over again, he reads in an arresting, personal way that compels you to reread the original text of the Torah. Something really, I would almost say, psychoanalytic about it. Number 4 on your page. We're going back now to the beginning of Sefer Dvarim, the background for all this. Right at the beginning of chapter 1, it's chapter 1, verse 9, the beginning of Moses' many words to the people. I said to you at that time, that's a quote from the Torah, Lo uchal levadi setetchem. I can't go on carrying you alone. I can't bear you. You are just so troublesome. Right? He goes on to say, you are such a burden. You're constantly making trouble. So what I'm telling you to do now is to set up a system of a hierarchy of leadership, right? Small claims courts to set up under me because I just can't do it by myself anymore. So you're just too much for me. That's the obvious meaning of the text. But look at what the Mea Shiloach says. Moses said to the people, Havu lachem anashim chachamim unevonim v'yedidim. Appoint for yourselves people who are wise and understanding and distinguished. Yeduim means famous for good reason. That's in the text of the Torah. Who will support me? And here is the comment of the Mea Shiloach. When they were close to entering the land, Moses felt, interesting word, that it was the will of God, it was Ritzon Hashem, it was the desire of God that Joshua would lead the people into the land and not himself. Well, he knew that because God had already told him in the story of when he hits the rock, if you remember. He hits the rock instead of speaking to the rock, and God says to him, because, right, it's a very, very puzzling passage, doesn't seem to be commensurate at all with any sin. He says, Lo taviu, you will not bring this community into the land. And Moses didn't complain then or ever since, till the prayer. And here what we have then is Moses felt, it's that driving the whole of Moses' experience into his inner world. He felt that God wanted that Joshua would take over the leadership. But what Moses desired was that Israel should pray to God, to say to God, She'enam rotzim b'manhig acher, that they don't desire any other leader. Now, it's a play of desires here. Moses instinctively feels that God's will is that Joshua should take over. Against that, Moses' desire is that the people should desire to have him as the only possible leader, that he is the only leader that they want, and they should pray to God on that basis. In other words, it's human desire against divine desire, and he wants to mobilize his people to invest that much desire into their prayer. And so he hints to them. Ramaz lahem. What's a hint? He can't tell them directly, I want you to love me, right? Even the most blatant political leaders don't exactly say that, all but, depending how blatant they are. But of course, that's the underlying feeling, I want you to love me, and love me. Love me to the point that, yes. But he just hints, and he says, I can't carry you alone. If you want me to go on leading you, this is the reading now. If you want me to go on leading you, you have to help me out by praying. You have to want me so much that you will pray, and maybe God will listen. And he hopes that they will understand his meaning, the expression. Shehem yavinu. Shehem lo havinu. And they didn't understand. They heard only the surface meaning, the conscious meaning, if you will, of what he said. Now you should set up all kinds of hierarchies and small claims courts and so on and so forth. They don't get the pathos of, I can't do it alone. The idea of alone. And he is somehow trying to reach out to them implicitly. He can only do it by hinting. And they don't get the hint. And that is setting up a theme now, which is actually fraught with paradox and anguish, and other things as well. The idea that Moses is trying to communicate somewhere subliminally to the people. He can't say the words clearly, and he's hoping that they get it. Henyavin, the idea of Havana. Havana is to understand something from the midst of something else. That is to go in deep in what someone has said and ask, what does he really mean? Now that kind of question, what does he really mean? Mostly we don't see any need to be so attentive. We think, well, I understand what they mean. They mean what they say they mean. But perhaps sometimes we do actually cock up our ears, we open our ears and we listen. He means something more here, and they don't get it. And so it doesn't happen. He is not protected by the prayers of the people. And clearly he feels a certain grievance about it. There's a very lovely moment that he plays on here. He asked for the appointment of wise, understanding, distinguished people, navonim, understanding people in the middle there, v'hem lo hivinu, but they didn't understand. So in the end, what do we have? The list in the Torah is they appointed people who were wise and distinguished. What happened to the navonim? And so the Midrash already says, navonim lo matzati. I didn't find any understanding people. And normally we read the Midrash as just saying, in general, a kind of general comment. But in this reading, Moses now knows on his flesh, in his bitter experience, that they don't have that capacity. Call it the intuitive capacity to listen to what someone really means, which lies beyond what they may actually have said. There's more going on. What are they really saying? I remember my father telling me this as a child. He was a community rabbi. And he said a great part of his job is understanding what people are really asking when they come to ask a question. There are layers there. That is an ability that apparently Bnei Israel, the Israelites, don't have. And that's actually a rather dire prediction for the future, if they can't acquire that capacity, because a lot is going to depend on their capacity to understand what is not spelled out. Now let's look at what I assume, are the sources for this Hasidic suggestion. When I read it, I thought of it as a very modern, not to say postmodern, scenario. The idea that someone is talking and hoping that what is between the lines will be read by the other person and it's not read. But it turns out that it's in the Midrash. It goes back to the beginning of time. It's been with us for centuries. Midrash Rabbah in number 5. When they came to cross the Jordan, again that expression, Moses reminded them of how often he had played defense counsel for them and asked for mercy for them when they were in trouble. Shehaya Savur, and he assumed Savur. He thought it was obvious that they would ask for mercy for him if he needed it. Now, I think what's being said here is, it's not tit for tat. That would be a rather crude reading of it. It's that Moses thought, I have a wonderful relationship with the people. Right? Their bark is better than their bite. You know, they know how often I've interceded for them, and I know for sure that they would intercede for me if ever I needed their prayers. It's just kind of, as we say in Hebrew, muvan me'elav. It's understood it's self-understood. That's what Moses thought. But it doesn't work out like that. Why does Moses keep saying to them throughout the book of Deuteronomy? And it's true, it happens several times. He will say to them, Ata over, atem ovrim, you are crossing over. Yes? I am dying here, and you are crossing over. Sometimes it actually says, you are crossing over, and I'm not crossing over. But every time he says you are crossing over, he's not just telling them what they're doing. They know very well what they're just about to do. Why does he keep harping on the fact that they are crossing over? And the Midrash wants to say he's hinting to them. It's again, poter lehem petach. He's saying you are crossing over. I'm not crossing over. That is, the pathos of his exclusion is implicit, but they don't get it. They simply don't hear it. And there is a parable here, which is a very poignant and really difficult parable to hear, particularly for women and those who root for women. Parable about a king and his lady, his wife, who displeases him in some way, and he decides to marry another wife. You can follow it in the Midrash, if you will. And he says to her, he speaks to her one day, he says, have you heard that I'm taking another wife? And she says, yes. Can I know the lady's name? And he tells her the name. What does she do? She gathers all her many children, who are his children too. And she says to them, you know your father is taking another wife. That means he's driving me out, he's divorcing me. Can you put up with having a stepmother? That's a free translation. Can you bear it? That's what I would call a hint. Yes, she doesn't exactly tell them all the fairy stories about bad stepmothers, but she is hinting there. Having a stepmother, is that okay with you? And she obviously wants them to say no. And what do you know? They say, yes, that's fine. You know, simply without any excess sensitivity. That's perfectly all right. And she says, yes, but do you know what stepmothers are like? And they say, yeah, they're not worried at all. And then she says to them, I'm not worrying for myself anymore. At first I was worried about my own future. Now I'm worried for you. I'm worried for you if you really don't get it, if you don't hear things, if you don't understand what's being said, then that really is not a good situation. And so in the end, again, Moses is frustrated, but for their sake, not just for his own. So there's a feeling here of something very wrong that needs to be put right as quickly as possible. And then there is one more midrash, number 6. And again, I'm going to do it rather quickly. This time, and I think this shows that this is not just one moment. The moment when Moses tells the story in chapter 3 of God's rejection of his prayer. And actually, it's an underlying theme throughout the book. Every time Moses refers to crossing over, he's actually pleading with them or reproaching them. Why didn't you help me when this still was a possibility? There is an undercurrent to the whole book. It culminates right at the end of the book, in one of the last speeches that Moses makes to his people, when he says to them, it's chapter 29, when he says to them, "V'lo naten lachem Hashem lev ladat, inayim lirot, v'oznayim lishmoa, ad hayom hazeh." God didn't give you a knowing heart, seeing eyes, hearing ears, until this day. Now, normally we read that in context as meaning it's part of a general tochacha. It's part of a general rebuke to the people that is there in Moses' speeches, reminding them of the sins of the past. And now he's making a general comment about how all along you've been amazingly insentient, somehow not getting it. And we assume it means in the story of the people and God. According to the Midrash we're going to look at now, here Moses is talking about his own personal case. He's talking about himself. He's reducing the perspective to my history with you. And he's saying, you never could, never did know how to let your heart know. Right? It's a combination of the emotional and the intellectual. Right? The lev is not only emotion. It's also a heart that knows, a heart that knows how to listen for content that may not be so obvious. And so what we have here is right at the beginning of number 6, Bishvil atzmo diber. He spoke about his own case. Now that's a little shocking. Why does he narrow things down to his own personal story? You'd think he'd want to leave them with a large story rather than a purely personal story. But then he goes on, the Midrash goes on to give the details here. And I'll paraphrase it briefly. God made 2 decrees, 2 harsh decrees. One was against the people and the other was against Moshe. The decree against the people was after the golden calf, when God said, just leave me alone and I'll destroy this people. Yeah? The whole people is slated for destruction. And Moses on that occasion prayed to God to annul his decree and said to God, Slachna, please forgive your people. And God said, Salachti kitvarecha, I have forgiven as you have asked. In other words, your words are powerful. Right? Your desire to save the people affects me, and right, I put aside my decree. The second occasion was against Moshe, as we just read, where Moshe asked Ebrana, please let me cross over. And God replied, Lo ta'avor, you will not cross over. And Moses wants God to cancel this decree also. Why shouldn't God give him both satisfaction? But God actually only gives him the national satisfaction. When it comes to his own affair, God seems to be very unremitting, very, very ruthless. And there's a beautiful little speech here in which God says to Moshe, Moshe, you don't know how to do this. You haven't got the tact of this kind of situation. On one issue, I gave you what you wanted, and I didn't do what I intended to do. So you can't come and ask for both issues. You have to choose between the two. You have to have partial satisfaction and partial frustration. That's how it goes. And there's an image here. You can't hold the rope at both ends. It's a rather mysterious image. Right? How are you going to play with anyone if you're holding the 2 ends of the rope? Right? If you are in some kind of a relationship with me, you can't control all the issues. One might really wonder, why can't he have satisfaction on both issues? I do wonder that somewhere. Surely the loving God can be loving across the board. But there's a certain logic here, and I want to call it erotic logic. And now we're coming close to our discussion of eros. What is the logic of eros, of desire? It's the logic of wanting something that is out of reach, right? It's not within your reach, it's on the other side. You have to cross over from your edge to the other edge. And the result will be a bittersweet experience. That's how in human life we experience desire. Now I'm getting my material here from a very wonderful book that I heartily recommend if you like this kind of reading. It's called Eros the Bittersweet, and it's by Anne Carson, the extremely talented, prodigiously talented Canadian poet, essayist, dramatist, translator from the Greek scholar, etc., etc. Endlessly talented. And in this book, Eros, she makes a couple of very forceful comments about the bitter sweetness of erotic love, of wanting that which is beyond you, that which is over on the other bank of the river. You have to go beyond yourself. The nature of such desires, she says, the expression bittersweet comes from a poem by Sappho, the Greek poet Sappho, who uses that expression, Eros the bittersweet. Sweet, I understand, but why bitter? Where is the bitterness in Eros? And as Anne Carson puts it and shows through many quotations, examples, she's really quite amazing. She says it's always a mixture of delight and pain. Delight because you reach across, you come close to getting exactly what you want, but then there's always some kind of a wrench. In some way you're arrested. You can't really get what you wanted. And if you get it, then you don't want it that much anymore. Right? That's the end of the Eros. That is, Eros exists in its full force when it's something you can't hold. One example that again comes from Greek literature is of ice cubes, on a hot day. How wonderful it is to get hold of the ice cubes and the things. But then what happens? Of course, you hold the ice cubes in your hot hand, and that's the end of that, which is not the end of Eros. You'll go and want some more, want something else. But Eros has limited satisfaction. But what it does make you feel, if not unequivocal delight, is alive. There's a great sense of aliveness when there is that moment of reaching out beyond yourself, beyond your own edge. She quotes Aristotle, who said, all men, all human beings, I hope, by their very nature, reach out to know. And we see here that Eros can be for love, literally, the love object, or it can also be for knowledge. Aristotle thinks, it's libido sciendi, the Latin expression for it, libido, yeah? The lust for knowledge, the real desire for knowledge. It's an urgent and transformative desire. It takes you places that you simply have never been. But again, it will never be finally satisfied, because once you have it, you want more. You're always reaching out. Now, in terms of a desire for knowledge, that's a good thing, that you will never be satisfied and you'll always go on further and further. Aristotle thinks this is the glory of the human desire for knowledge. At the same time, you can't forget that bittersweetness. And this bittersweetness involves somewhere a feeling of the possibility of getting what you want and the impossibility of getting it. Right? You hope that you can, and then you realize you can't actually. I won't make any particular comments about love in this context. I suppose everyone has their own experience. But maybe there is something about the sheer edge of love, the edginess of love, that is doomed somewhere to not finding its full satisfaction. It's not exactly what I wanted. Something like that. What do we have in Hebrew? That word la'avor, the word ever. For instance, don't say, Moses tells his people, don't say, mi ya'avor lanu, who will cross over for us to the other side of the sea? You won't find Torah and God on the other side of the sea or in the heavens. Lo b'shamayim. It's actually in your heart. It's very accessible. No need to reach out. But here we are talking about Moses, who does want to reach out. That's the nature of his being. And so, again, I would quote, the idea of Dodi Hamak Avar in Song of Songs. Song of Songs is the book about Eros. And it's the book in which the lovers almost come together, but never quite come together. And the woman, the beloved, right, says at one point, she tells a story about how her lover, Hamak Avar, slipped past me, was elusive, and then disappeared. Now the word la'avor then means to pass by me. It's a volatile movement, and it's a movement that means that in the end he disappears. La'avor means to disappear, actually. And when Moses on the top of the mountain says to God, asks God, this is the other time in his life, that he asks God for something for himself. Hareini na'et kodecha. I want the full mystical vision of you, of your glory. Show me your glory. And God answers, no. No man can see me and live. But this is what I will do. And he puts Moshe into the purely erotic situation. He says, I'm going to put you into this crevice in the rock, into this cave, and I'm going to cover your face with my hand. And then as I'm passing by, b'ovri, ani a'avir et kol tuvi, I will make all my goodness, all my virtue, all my beauty pass in front of you, and I'll remove my hand from the cave entrance, and from your face, from your eyes, and you will see my back because you can't see my face. In other words, you will have an after vision. You will be able to tell the story afterwards of how God passed by me, and he didn't allow me to see him directly. And you will always know that that is, in a way, what a human life is like. That's what Kafka means, I think. But there's always that sense of a trace of something that was here and that I wasn't allowed actually to hold with both hands. Now, that emphasis on passing by, that God passes by, that leaves Moses now, having had this experience, now faced with the problem of what to do with this people. God has redirected him now from the place of confrontation with desire. He has said to him, I know that your keenest desire is to go across, to create another stage in your life when you go on desiring. In a way, I'm decreeing that this is the end of your life of desire. Lo ta'avor. Right? Nothing is going to pass you by anymore because that's the end. And it's at that stage that God somehow hints, as I've suggested, there is another horizon for desire. Transfer your attentions to the people. Go tell them the story. Tell them the story. Begin to talk to them with something of the passion with which you wanted me and you wanted the land and so. So in some way sublimate your passion and now turn it towards the people. You have to leave this people very shortly, and Moses now knows. And I want to suggest that this moment in Moses' life, when he turns towards the people and tries to effect some kind of deep change in them and in his relations with them, that they should no longer be alienated, that the people should not be so quick to ignore Moses and his messages, so insensate, so without a heart of recognition. He wants somehow to affect them deeply at this moment. I'm suggesting that perhaps this scene, as I'd like to speak about it now for the 5 minutes or so we have left, this scene is what leads Moshe to the honorific of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses becomes Moses our teacher, which is a rabbinic expression, of course. He's never called that in the Torah itself. Why do the sages call him that? Well, because he does teach the people, of course. But I think it's this scene particularly. And this is my way of putting it. See how I can say it quite succinctly. What is Moses doing when he tells the people his tragic story, how God refused him? And when he tells it in the way that the Midrash tells it, that is, implying a certain grievance against the people for not praying for him, In other words, you brought me into this problem, right? I don't even complain about God anymore. I'm complaining about you because you didn't intercede for me and you didn't get it. And all that is somewhere implicit in the story that Moses now tells the people. It's because of you that I don't get to go into the land. Now, that's a subliminal theme in the whole thing. But in some way, what Moses is doing now, he's not telling it to them explicitly, but he is again hinting, and hinting strongly. He's telling a story about his frustration, his humiliation, refusal of his desire. And what he's doing, I'm suggesting, is that he wants the people somehow to grow a heart, to begin to understand what he's really telling them, to hear what he's doing as he stands in front of them and stages himself. I'd like to put it like that. He stages himself so that they can watch him and listen to him as he's talking and learn something that is not just the official messages of the laws that he has always conveyed to them on the conscious level, but they can learn something as one learns, and this is going to be quite provocative, as a class learns from a teacher. Roland Barthes, the French philosopher, essayist, post-structuralist, has a very challenging comment. He says, when a teacher teaches a class, he is like the patient in psychoanalysis. Like the patient who talks and talks and talks while the analyst listens silently. The analyst is listening and learning everything he needs to know about the patient from what the patient is implicitly saying. He is listening to the complaints and to the themes that keep coming up, and he's listening to the rhythms, to the way this person unknowingly is really displaying himself in front of the analyst. So the analyst can begin somehow to try to help him. Compare that to the position of a teacher in front of a class. The teacher is talking and talking and talking, while the class is listening silently, watching and listening and learning many things besides the actual content. There is the content. I don't know how far this is true of Zoom. I don't think I have that in my notes. But certainly in a live audience, you are there for them, and they know all kinds of things about you if they are perceptive. By the end of more than you know yourself. And I'm suggesting that is Moshe's position. He is taking the risk now of really talking to his people in his own voice and talking personally about how they lacked a heart. The whole theme we've been exploring. His disappointment in them, his frustration, and so on. And somewhere they are watching someone struggle with his own, his own ignorance, his own failure to completely master his own fate. Some are struggle to master, and they're learning something from that about what is being asked of them. What is being asked of them is to recognize their own ignorance, emotional ignorance, emotional unintelligence, and to try to go beyond it. Now, from a psychoanalytic point of view, that is the only way one grows. One grows not by discovering the delights of knowledge, but almost on the contrary, by realizing how much ignorance there is in one, how much one is actually shutting oneself out from, closing one's heart to, closing one's perception. And it's only on the basis of resistance that one comes to some kind of growth. You work through the resistance in some way. That really tells you something. Since we must finish, I just want to jump to the end. Does Moses achieve the desire of opening the people up to the knowing heart in them so that they can continue without him? So that in the end, they'll be capable of continuing to read Torah and learn from Moses, not only on the obvious level, not only on the plain pshat meaning of the words, but through what we call oral Torah. That is, through interpretation and intuition and imagination and noticing words here and words there. Oh, Moses must have meant something more through his words than he was even aware of, perhaps, right? Something about these other levels. In the end, Moses goes up the mountain and God shows him the whole land. And God says to him, here I'm showing you the whole land. Look out over it. And that's exactly what Moses does. And then God comes back to him, and these are the last words Moses hears in this world. God says to him, I've shown you the land, as I promised you. V'shama lo ta'avor. There you shall not pass over. So there is a repetition of that harshness, it sounds like. Why does God so, the last words, it's clear to Moses he's not going to pass it. Why does God have to say it to him as his last communication? I'm suggesting that what God is saying to him is, Shama lo ta'avor. That will not be the transition. That will not be the crossing over of your life, right? You've had to give up on that, but you will have succeeded in other transmissions. You will have succeeded in other crossings over. You will have come across to your people in an unforgettable way so that it will change them forever. It will change the basis of what they think listening is. Now, that listening is not just listening to what's obvious, but in some way to what will keep them alive through the ages. The oral law is the life of the Jewish people. The idea that we can go on learning and we can find new nuances and new meanings in the text, that's what keeps us learning. I'm going to stop right there and open up for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Zornberg. The first question I want to ask is just a short one, just to repeat the book you mentioned earlier.
Anne Carson, that one?
I believe so.
Anne Carson, Carson. It's called Eros, the Bittersweet. It's a short book, quite dense.
Thank you. So this one is from Sarah Brooks. I see one of the main tensions in Moses' life is the astounding privilege of being close to God, but being unable to sustain relationships with other humans. He is separated from his birth family. He loses family upbringing, and then finally Miriam and sons drop out of the picture, and even Joshua usurps him. And then even in the end, the one being with whom he does seem to have ongoing intimacy, God, abandons him. What does that tell us about the possibility for true intimacy in our own lives?
What was the last sentence? What does that tell us about?
The final question, yeah, what does it tell us about true intimacy in our own lives?
Well, as you can see, I don't take such a dark view of Moses' life. I think there is a kind of real change that happens at the end, and it's there in the many speeches he makes to his people, his ways of recanting the story, and particularly in his way of presenting himself differently to the people as a person, as a human being, rather than simply a medium between God and so intimacy. Well, intimacy with God, it seems to be a very different thing from intimacy with people. Right? It's two. They often don't go together. I think they often. Someone who has a passion of this kind for God, often I think finds it hard to be with people. Moses is encouraged by God. It's rather stronger than encouraged by God to recognize that his real role in the world is with people. And I think that says something about the major importance for a religious leader of some kind of vivid intimacy with people, some kind of way of being there as a full human being with people and bringing the spiritual experience, which may not be exactly what he might have wanted, bringing that to bear in the life with others.
Yes, thank you. The next question here, is it possible that Moses is providing a model for behavior at the end of life? Unlike
I
some
can't
other,
quite, I can't quite make out the words. I'm sorry.
oh,
Is it
sorry.
possible?
Is it possible that Moses is providing a model for behavior at the end of life? Unlike some other religions, the person notes, where prophets go to heaven on the backs of flying horses, for example, Moses, like all men, will die with unfulfilled dreams and unanswered questions.
That is true. But I think the good news is also there, that he becomes Moshe Rabbeinu, that he becomes someone who really was effective in arousing the people's curiosity, if nothing more than that. Right? That's really, in a sense, what I've been saying, in making people feel a little less satisfied with what you already hold in your hand, what you already know, and really realizing that there's more to reach out for, to go deeper.
Thank you. I'm seeing some new questions coming here. It seems like there is a real disconnect between Moses and the people. They can't understand him, and he can't or doesn't want to speak to them. Why does God choose him to be their leader when there is such a huge constitutional divide between them? What does this teach us about the leader and the led?
Maybe because what God is using Moses for, and I'm speculating, what he's using Moses for is not just to be an effective teacher. He didn't choose the most effective teacher, that's for sure. Why did he choose someone who stammers? And everyone addresses that question. You know, Buber addressed it, Levinas addressed it. Why choose a stammerer? If not in some way to choose a person who's all too human in some sense. In some sense, you know, the feeling of failure, that he resists, he fails. In other words, in that sense, he's like us. He is someone who doesn't need instant success, and that it's only at the end. And again, of course, I'm emphasizing my reading here. It's only at the end that he comes around. I think that's exactly the idea in psychoanalysis. But first of all, you have to acknowledge your resistance. You know, somewhere you have to begin to see what the blocks are, to be aware of the blocks. And it's only then that when Moses, in this sense, is an ideal choice by God, because he becomes a model of a certain kind of movement.
Thank you. Is it really about the people, not Moses? Deliverance will come through the people. Like, is this God's purpose? That it's
God's purpose is the people. That's it seems pretty clear from the beginning. Moses was told he is a shaliach. He is an emissary, nothing more. And of course, Moses' desires are much more than that. Moses would like to think of himself as being an end in himself, quite understandably.
So this, we're running out of time here. This can be our last question. There's a question about the Midrash where Moses is shown Rabbi Akiva and doesn't understand a word. Do you have any reflections on that as it relates?
Rabbi Akiva understands that he didn't know everything, right? That in the future, his disciple's disciple, Rabbi Akiva, will know more than him, will develop more from the Torah. And that is, again, that bittersweet experience. In other words, the bitterness is that I didn't get all that, but the sweetness is I left a people who are capable of evolving, of moving more and more. So yes, I think it actually, it matches our theme quite well.
Thank you. I think that's enough questions for this evening for you. Thank you again for this engaging and insightful exploration of the text. I'm sure our participants have much to reflect on, and thank you again, Dr. Zornberg. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you all. and especially those of you who let me see your faces. It's really a pleasure to see faces. And I hope you will continue, Michael El Chayel, from one peak to the next peak.
Yeah.
All the best.